Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Occupancy Evaluation Technology webinar. As you get settled, we're going to go through a few reminders. AIA California sincerely acknowledges the professional expertise our volunteer presenters provide. We greatly appreciate the diversity of perspectives and recognize that the items presented in today's session may elicit a variety of responses. We strongly encourage attendees to be constructive in their comments and questions to the presenters and to one another to ensure that we have a session that is productive and an environment that is positive for everyone. Additionally, please do not use the chat box to ask any questions for today's panelists. Instead, use the Q&A. With the Q&A feature, attendees can like a question to move it to the top of the queue. And as always, the webinar content and additional resources will be available online shortly after the session. Today's webinar will introduce occupancy evaluation, the range of applications and technology available today, and qualifies for 1.5 AIA HSW. AIA California will report those learning units for you once you have finished the full session. Now, to quickly introduce our presenter, Dr. Flavia Gray brings over 14 years of experience developing data strategies for innovative design solutions for technologically and programmatically complex higher education research and healthcare buildings. She leads ZGF's Data Strategy and Research Group, where she partners with clients and project teams to incorporate data-driven decision-making into all phases of design. Now on to today's presentation. Dr. Gray, welcome. Please take it away.
Thank you, Rebecca. And hi, everyone. Welcome. Let me share my screen. And let's get right into it. And so that was such a great introduction. You know, this is something that I'm very passionate about at CGF. As Rebecca was saying, I lead our data strategy and research firm-wide team, and a big part of what we do is occupancy evaluation. And so today we're going to be talking about all of the different technologies, some of the things that are in the market today. So I want to jump right into it. I also wanted to do a quick introduction of CGF for those of you who might not be familiar with us. We're an architecture firm. We have now 7 offices. We have a new Denver office that just opened recently, and then our biggest office is in the Portland area. I am based off of the Seattle office. We have one in LA for those of you in California, Washington, DC, New York, Vancouver. You can see that we're a little bit less than 800 people firm-wide. And a lot of what we do is, yes, architecture and planning, urban design, interior design, but also this area of occupancy evaluation is part of what we do, and we try to incorporate it into all the projects that we can. And so it's really about how do we engage with our stakeholders, how do we get the voices of the occupants, and how can that both inform our design, and how can we learn from that? And so on that note, again, this is what I was saying. We're talking about occupancy evaluation technologies. And so what is occupancy evaluation? What do we want to get out of it? Why do we want to do it? We'll talk about digital surveys, which is one that is the most common and easiest way to implement an occupancy evaluation, especially now that we're all in this world of hybrid connections and working across different offices and different areas. Sensors and simulation, and how can that support our insights on the building? Commercial applications, and this is literally just a sampling. There's lots of different things out there, but just to give you an idea and a feeling to the different things that you will encounter. And so no affiliations, all opinions are my own. You know, there's no link to get a discount. This is just for us to be aware of what are some of the potential and what are some of the things that are out there. And if you're using some of these things, I would love to hear about it. So feel free to use the chat. If there's any of these that you like, that you can recommend, that you've had experience with, I would love to hear about it. And then some of the things where things are moving is how do we leverage wearable technologies? And so how can we take advantage of things like smartwatches in order to collect data about people? And I want to leave some time at the end for us to be able to have a conversation. If you have any questions, but also if you have any experience, if you have any other things that you want to suggest that we talk about. So what is occupancy evaluation? And so basically it's about how do we leverage consistent, formal, and validated research methodologies to do user engagement and to get more feedback and insight into how people relate to buildings. And so on a big hand, why we do it is in order to inform and validate our design. And so one, as I'm mentioning, it's about how do we better engage with our users in a way that is going to be consistent, that it's going to be actionable, and that's going to be insightful. How will that help define and evaluate the project goals? What can we learn from them about the way that they're using the space or their needs, how they move through the space to help inform our design? And a big one for clients is so that it can help support change management. And so when you make some decisions and you make some changes in your building, how do you have that conversation with the occupants to make sure that they understand and that there's a matching of expectations from what they need, what they want, and what is being delivered and how? As a firm internally, for us, it's really great because it's a way to be more consistent and standardized in the way that we do our lessons learned at the end of the project. You know, a lot of times we go back, like what worked well, what didn't work well, how do we incorporate that into the way that we work into future projects? Mostly it's about continuous improvement. There's a little bit of worry for some people when it comes to occupancy evaluation. I think the word evaluation, it gets really big and people worry about, am I going to get some negative feedback? Are they going to tell me that I did something wrong? But, you know, one, for the building itself, buildings are not static. It's not going to be exactly the same in 100 years. There's going to be different changes. There's, again, how people occupy and operate the space. There's going to be renovations. And so this is going to give us some insights into the things that are working well, the things that match the expectations, and the things that we could do better. But also it's great feedback as designers of the way that we think about buildings. A lot of it is, you know, the gut feeling and what we think is right. But this is really having that evidence of when we try new things, when we try new design ideas, new technologies, how did it go? And should I incorporate them? Should I try that again in a new building? Being able to do this in all of our different projects also gives us an idea across our offices and across our project typologies. How are we performing? What are we doing really well? What can we learn from a different typology that can be incorporated into a new building? And finally, this idea of the more we know, the better we are at addressing the things that are special about each project. And so how do we customize the way that we think about the occupancy evaluation to really get those clear insights about the things that you're particularly interested in? When we talk about occupancy evaluation, most people go straight to post-occupancy and only think about after we build the building. And so usually when we talk about post, we talk about 6 to 12 months after occupancy at least. Some people might do it up to 2 years. Pre-occupancy is anytime before construction or renovation. And so we'll talk in a minute a little bit more about what that means and how do you do it. Now we're also starting to talk more about permanent occupancy evaluation. And so continuous monitoring while the building is occupied, that is now possible through all of the different sensor technologies. So pre-occupancy evaluation, the biggest question that we get is, does it apply to my project? When can I do pre-occupancy evaluation? I get a lot like, it's a brand new space. We don't have, you know, an existing space that we're renovating. And so how do I do that? If you have a new building or space, usually we look for a similar building that is operating with either the same occupants that might move into your existing building, well, the building that you're creating, or a similar effort. So we'll do this, for example, with a new clinic that we're designing. We'll go to a similar clinic from the client where they have the same areas, the same type of staff, and so that we can get some feedback into how that building is performing for them. What are the things that are working well? What are the things that are not working well? And that can help inform some of these priorities for the new building. We've also done it with residential buildings where we have a similar population. And so, for example, working with higher education, with universities, they might have residential buildings for faculty and staff. And so we can compare one of their existing buildings so that that can help inform the new building that we're going to design. If you are renovating a building, then you do have that opportunity that you might have access to the current occupants to understand how are things working, what do they need? And so again, to inform your design. A big thing that happens once we start talking about occupancy evaluation is that people go straight to comfort. Is it about people being able to let us know whether they feel hot or cold? And so is it about people complaining and how do we manage that versus understanding the why maybe we're getting some of that feedback. But there's a great opportunity with occupancy evaluation to be a lot more thorough and insightful and let us understand things that we can't directly measure. So as an occupant, I can tell you whether I'm hot or I'm cold, but I can't tell you whether the CO2 levels are high in my space, right? CO2 is something that you can't smell, you can't feel. And so we don't really understand how it impacts us, but there's been some really great research connecting CO2 levels to cognitive function that shows us that as CO2 levels go up, and for those of you who might not be familiar, when we talk about outdoor levels, and so baseline levels for CO2, we're talking about 500 parts per million. And so down here in the green area, and as we're in a room and there's more people and we're all breathing and talking and excited, those CO2 levels start to go up and we start to see some big impacts on your cognitive functioning. And so the Harvard School of Public Health, the THN School of Public Health and their Healthy Buildings program, they did the cog effects studies where they did this connection between understanding the CO2 levels and in general, how do green certified buildings and most importantly, buildings that have high ventilation rates were impacting the people's experience in the building. And so here you can see that they found that the performance was 26% higher, and especially looking at very specific activities for your cognitive functioning is thinking about strategical thinking, your ability to focus, your ability to apply and respond to crisis all gets impacted once you start to be in a space that doesn't have the adequate ventilation. And so things like being able to understand, you know, the way that you search and use for information, or the way that, you know, they say, how do you perform at basic levels, at applied activity levels, looking at task orientation. And this becomes really critical, for example, if you're designing an education building and so you're having some conference rooms. How many times have you been in a presentation and you're getting sleepy and you're getting tired and you're really trying to pay attention because it's so interesting, but you can't help it? Well, there's a big chance that it's not you, but it's that environment that you're in that it's making you sleepy and it's making you tired. And so this is the potential when we can start to have sensors, or we can have some of these other technologies incorporated into occupancy evaluation, that it's not just the perception of the occupants, which is great to get and it's very insightful, but it also helps us connect some of these invisible things that are not so obvious. So overall, some of the things that you can measure with some of these technologies and in general to support your occupancy evaluations. Things like space utilization, and this one we'll talk about. It's a big one right now with the whole return to office and different ways in which we are utilizing our spaces. Thinking about how people manage their time and where they are, things like booking conference rooms, desks, wayfinding, how do we navigate space? How do we find our colleagues and connect with different colleagues? How can we support collaboration? And then on the building side, the environmental side, things like lighting, temperature, humidity levels, noise levels, the carbon dioxide that I talked a little bit about, and sanitization. I'm seeing a question from Nathaniel. Hi, Nathaniel. And he's saying that pre-occupancy evaluation is now a service. Yes. 3D models allows clients to get a very real understanding of building spaces during design. And please elaborate on how pre-occupancy and how this fits into traditional owner architect services. There are many firms that are doing now occupancy evaluation, both as part of your overall design package. And so some of the larger firms are starting to include a percentage of their earnings or of the budget for the project into doing occupancy evaluation. We do it as well as part, so CGF does it as part of our way of designing. And so this is something that the partners are very passionate about and are supporting a lot so that we can do it a lot more, so that we can get more insights into how our buildings are performing and how the decisions that we're making are really helping occupants. It's also helping have conversations like a sense of belonging and welcoming, now that there's a lot of emphasis on engaging with different populations and different cultures and people with different backgrounds, things like neurodiversity, and how do you have some of those conversations. So it goes part of stakeholder engagement and user engagement, but also as part of this understanding the feedback into how the building is performing. A lot of people also include the sustainability metrics. And so thinking about high performing buildings and thinking about energy consumption and waste generation, water consumption. And so how do those all come together? And so today I'm talking more about the things that impact the people, not necessarily the performance of the building itself in terms of the sustainability metrics, but a lot of firms are starting to bring those together. And so as an overall building performance evaluation package. So hope that helps. We'll keep talking about it. And so there you go. We'll continue. So how do we decide what we're going to do? And so the project timeline, the project cost, the project size. There's a lot of firms who are smaller firms who feel like they don't have necessarily the capacity and the budget to be able to include this into their projects. There's things that are simpler and easier. So things like doing digital surveys. I'll talk a lot about digital surveys in a minute. That's a great opportunity that is low cost, that is easy to implement, that is easy to analyze. And so there's some opportunities for how do we do this with smaller budgets, with shorter timelines. And so those are some of the big barriers. And of course, the larger the project, the more interested the client is in some of these feedback, the more opportunities you have to push some of these different technologies. Again, very important to understand what their objectives are so that the occupancy evaluation can be really focused into that. And so what is it that they care about? And so what is the type of feedback that is going to be most useful for that project? So some good feedback from Laurie in the Q&A. So I'll let everyone read that. But yes, basically evaluating human behavioral patterns and organizing space and furniture accordingly, and how that has been changing. Yes, it's not just about the aesthetic of the spaces, but also it's about how it works, what people need, what they're doing. Sorry, I was reading that Q&A. Okay, so basically we started looking through all of these different technologies and started to map out, what are the things that take a lot more effort? What are the things that are easier to implement? What are the things that are going to have the most impact? And so I'll talk a little bit about those, but just so that you understand, that's where we're focusing, is both in what is the impact, what is the effort, and again, something that's really easy to implement is a digital survey. And so there's partnering that you can do. For example, the Berkeley CBE is one of the pioneers of starting to do some of the occupancy evaluations and developing a digital survey that could be implemented into many firms. And now they have thousands of different projects that they've implemented it on. It's something that is simple to implement. There are several, for example, the Center for Health Design, and so different institutions and agencies that have formats that they're happy to share, where you have a starting list of questions so that you know what to ask your occupants. And this is something that can be deployed in things like SurveyMonkey, Microsoft Forms, Qualtrics. And so depending what technology you're more comfortable with, what you're using, what your client is using, you could leverage some of these. And so it's basically putting together the list of questions. At CGF, we have several survey templates that we use as starting points. And so we have one that is a big part of starting the conversation with many clients, is the LEED B4.1 innovation credit for occupancy evaluation. And that is really focused on environmental comfort. They have 7 different criteria that you need to put in there and to ask your occupants about. they ask you for at least 30% of your occupants to answer the survey and to make sure that you put together an action plan for any area where you discover that your occupants are less than 80% satisfied. And so usually that's where we start the conversation. That opens the door to be able to talk about what are the specific things about your project that you would like to get feedback on. What is new about this building? What is special about this typology? What is the type of feedback that is going to be more actionable for you, of things that you can, that will make a difference into your decision making for this project? And so through those conversations and through the expertise of some of the external innovation companies that work on these, we've developed starting templates for research laboratories, for offices, for healthcare, both thinking about the staff and the patients, for residential, for higher education, and more, but just to give you an idea. And this is usually a starting place of what are the different areas that we could cover through the survey. And so again, with the lead B4.1, they ask you to ask about thermal comfort, air quality, acoustic comfort, lighting, and cleanliness and maintenance. And we include things like overall visual aesthetics, overall satisfaction. If people are working, there's some workplace questions as well. When it comes to making it more custom for different typologies, so things like workplace, really understanding what people's working practices are, how many meetings they have with how many people, where do they have those meetings? Is it more informal conversations? What type of technology? How does that work? Are they having remote meetings at their desks, or are they only having meetings at the conference rooms? How are they using building amenities? How often? What is working well? What is not working well? What else do they need? Is there travel if they're in a big campus? Are they moving in between buildings? Do they need to reserve their desks? What type of technology are they using? What is their commutes like? For things like healthcare, we can start to talk about clinic design and the privacy to the client, to the patients, but also to the staff, the visibility that they have and the control over it. The exam rooms, how do they work? Are there hierarchies? How does the space help support or break down some of those hierarchies? How is the lighting design influencing the way that they work? Are there sustainability features? And then, residential can also be, you can include things about like the appliances that you have in the building. Again, the different building amenities. Nathaniel's asking, could there be sample surveys for well buildings? Yes, definitely. I think we have these different modules that are pretty much plug and play. And so we mix and match them. And so definitely we can put it together for a well building. And again, once you understand what you're trying to address, it's about sitting together and putting it together. So that's why I wanted to talk about what the timeline looks like. And so we always start by having a meeting with the client where we define the goals, not only for the project, but also for the occupancy evaluation. What is the scope? So what are the different things that they want to ask about? What are the things, the type of feedback that they need? And what is the timeline for their project? If it's a pre-occupancy evaluation, when are we starting construction? When are the occupants going to be available? And so what would be a good time to be able to deploy the survey? If it's a school, we always have like, when do they go on vacation? When do they have exams? So when do they have the mental space and capacity to be able to participate in the surveys? And so that's all of the discussions for setting the timeline. Edit and finalize the survey questions. So this is exactly that point where, we have these starting templates, but we're going to customize it for this project. Are you going after well? Are you going after living building? Are you going after LEED certifications? Well, let's make sure that this is going to help support those processes. We deploy the pre-occupancy evaluation, and then the construction or renovation happens. And again, 6 to 12 months after occupancy, we'll deploy the post-occupancy evaluation, and then we can review the results and we can compare how did we do in our post-occupancy compared to our pre-occupancy, because that's the real value of the pre-occupancy, is being able to understand those deltas, those benefits that you had, and whether the goals that you set for yourself with the building are actually making a difference, and were they successful. What are some of the example things? So we'll look at some example results of things that we can learn about. So demographics. All of the surveys that we do are anonymous. We never collect any personal information. We do ask for demographic information for two purposes. One, you want to make sure that you have a representative sample of the population of the building. And so make sure that all of the different roles participated. And so here, for example, we have a clinic where you had administration, medical assistants, and the MDs, the providers, the physicians. And so we wanted to make sure that all of their voices were represented. You know, if it's a university, we might ask for the students to tell us whether they're first generation students so that we can understand how their perspectives change. And so again, one is this, are we getting a good sample of the population in the building? And then the second one is that this can become then filters by which we can separate the information. And so if you want to understand the difference between what the first students, the first grade students versus the master students are saying, we can use that as a filter so that we can separate. And so especially when you find something that you have some people who are not satisfied, it's easier to be actionable when you can break it down and know specifically who are the people who are being impacted by these different things. So demographics. Just an example of workspace. And so here again, this was for the clinic. And so one was the noise level. This was a pre-occupancy with their existing building. And so they were saying it's an open space. There's high noise level that they felt interfered with their work. They did feel that their space had enough for both individual and multidisciplinary teamwork. They could do different types of activities. The clinic environment allows me to quickly locate equipment, patients, and other employees so that they could understand the visibility. Hey, Nathaniel. So you have to resurvey because the respondents did not represent the population. 50% male, female population, but only 25 respond to the survey. Yes, when it's not representative, usually we bring it back to the client. In this case, because of the nurse population was mostly female, like most of the people in the building, and also it's a children's hospital. They had a lot of female physicians, and so they felt like it was representative that it was such a high female percentage. But that's again where you have that conversation. And so once you see that, you have to understand whether it makes sense for this particular building and this particular project that you're working towards. And if not, it does give you that feedback of like, well, the type of information that you have has only that perspective. Okay. Hopefully that helped. Let's see. So yeah, examples again on like, it could be on how satisfied versus how dissatisfied they are, how much do they agree versus disagree. This is a frequency chart. And so this is about trying to understand how often they participated in these different types of activities at their workstation. So how often did they have in-person meetings, remote meetings, whiteboarding, impromptu collaboration with coworkers, phone consults, house down comfort, focus. This one in particular was an office that we did the survey in February 2020. And it's clear because they still had a lot of in-person meetings. So they weren't yet having all remote. They still had a lot of in-person meetings. They were still working in the office. So you can see that 2 to 3 times per day, they're having those in-person meetings, lots of impromptu collaboration with coworkers. And then most of the day was going back to their desk and their heads down focus. They also they have the tradition of the month on Mondays, they do whiteboarding with their teams. And so that way they can set the plan for the week. And so here we can see that that was reflected in the whiteboarding, they do it once per week. You can also talk about adjacencies. And so we asked them, who of the other teams within the building do you work with most often? And so who are your top 3 collaborators? There's people who choose themselves because they really work more internally. And so here would be the golden circles, or the people who work more internally versus those who have strong connections. Like here, continuous improvement has strong connections with business ops and with innovation. And that means that both the continuous improvements identify both business ops and innovation as people they work with, and business ops and innovation identify the continuous improvement team as a team that they work with often. I see there is no one model that fits all scenarios. Not yet. I think if you we have that a lot with designers, that they feel like each one of the buildings is very unique and special. I would say there's things that are common between all of the buildings that we can leverage, but there's always going to be special things that you're working on, or something that's new, or a different perspective based on your specific user population that you might want to adapt. So yes, take advantage of the commonalities to simplify and streamline the process, but the most value comes when you're able to customize it. Okay. Occupant flow. So this was a great one with a university building, where we were asking the students what was their path through the building. And so once they walk into the building, into the left side, where did they go first? How long were they there? From there, where did they go next? And so this is really a mapping of those paths of the students through the building. And this one I also wanted to show you was really great, because then it informed, as we were looking at different programming opportunities for the building, how would that impact those paths of the students through the building? And so where would you have some of the people coming together? And so where would some of those bottlenecks be? But also, where are the paths that maybe could be optimized, because you want them to be able to spend their time studying, doing activities, not navigating the building. And so how do we make sure that we can also reduce some of those distances that they were walking through the building? One that's been really interesting, and so we've been doing this with a residential building. They wanted to get, it's a partnership with a university where we're doing research, and they wanted to get this opportunity to explore the working from home experience. And so we did a first survey the summer of 2021, the second one winter 2022. We're about to do another one now that the new building is coming online. And it's been great to see how things have changed. And so how much time are people spending at their homes, working from home? And how does that impact their perspective and their experience of their space? And so even from the summer of 2021, you can see here that 60% of the people were working 80 to 100% of their time from their apartments, versus by the winter of 2022, we're talking about 40%. So there was already a 20% of people who started going back into the office. And as we continue, it just becomes really interesting to see how this changes. And this one was one of my favorite ones. We had a lot of complaints, especially in the summer of 2021, about the background noise, and especially with their neighbors. They were very sensitive. And so here we were asking, where is it better? Is it better at home, or is it better at your on-site workspace? And so there's almost 50% of the people who said that the background noise was better at their on-site workspace. But now that they're actually going back into their offices, what we found is that now they're seeing that actually it's not so bad at home. I can focus, and there's a little bit less background noise in my home than at the office. Cool. So an interesting additional layer. So as we start to talk more about different technologies, so you're putting together your survey, you're sending it out. And one way to get an idea of like who they are, what are the areas in which some of the issues might be happening, or some of the good things might be happening that you want to learn from, is through those demographics. Because you can also ask, if it's a residential building, which floor are you on? Are you facing north, east, west? And so that gives you an idea of that area. And so if you're getting some glare feedback, okay, maybe it's the apartment that it's west facing, it makes sense. Next layer of doing it more intelligently is also to do a geolocated survey. And so in this case, they had their desks were identified with a number. And so we don't know who's in the desk, but we just know the location of the desks. And we were able to map out the survey responses to the actual location of the occupants within the building. And so one more layer, adding a little bit more complexity, but also helping that it can make it more actionable, that you can understand what are some of the things that you can address, or what are the things that are great successes that you have. Where is that happening? How do we replicate that benefit elsewhere? So let's talk a little bit about sensors. Usually when we talk about sensors, we'll think specifically about the environmental sensors. And so things like measuring the light levels, the temperature, the humidity levels in the space, the noise level, and the carbon dioxide, as I was saying. But a big one that's also now with the return to office and a lot of these transitions into how do we use our space utilization has been a big part of the conversation. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. What are some of those benefits of tracking the utilization? And so there's understanding what your capacity is for your space, what are the peak days and times, what are the user preferences? Do they prefer the more informal socialization spaces or the more formal, focused, quiet spaces? Where are they spending their time? Where are they getting their productivity going? If there are changes to your productivity or your efficiency, it helps to understand, what might be impacting it. You can have better, more intelligent use of your facilities. You can eliminate risk of overcrowding. This was the big one during COVID, of course. But also now there's a lot of worry about underutilized space, which connects to the ROI, right? You're investing a lot of money into your space. You want to make sure that it is utilized. And so having that true utilization ratio is really helpful to justify some of those investments and make sure that you're supporting your people. To assess the effectiveness of change management practices. And so, as I was saying, a lot of these is really helpful for some of these change management conversations, for understanding people's perspectives, for understanding what works, what doesn't work. And then even to align the space and the team's behavior. And so understanding why or why not they're using different areas within your building, can understand how does that match the way that they work. And so are they more prone to being together, to brainstorming together, to sketching, to whiteboarding? And so what does that space look like versus, they're having private conversations and on the phone, they're going to be on the phone most of the day. They don't really connect with their coworkers. They just need a quiet space with some privacy. Like, how do we make sure that your space is aligning that behavior? So what are some of the different types of sensors and technologies that you can use for this? There's facility-based sensors. So a lot of these are going into the smart buildings, as they say. So we can leverage some of the lighting that you're using, the HVAC systems, and so that you can have sensors there that are going to support you. We'll talk about a couple of examples in a minute. Presence-based sensors that could be under the seat. So when you sit down, it detects that there's a person there. It can be on your seat when you sit down. It could be a piezoelectric, so like it just detects the weight change, and so therefore knows there's a person in that seat. A lot of it is done with video and images, so there's both leveraging something that you might already have, like the conference room video analytics. That's when you leverage the video equipment and the setup that you already have in conference rooms, and you're using that to count the amount of people that are in the space. Some do it through security videos, or if they have like a CCTV system, that can be used as well. Batch swipe data is the #1 most used in most buildings to understand how many people are in the building. If you have different areas that are more secure where people also have to batch in, that gives you an idea of how much those different spaces are utilized. And then it can also leverage your network. And so there's different technologies now that can help you find a location within the space. Lots are starting to leverage Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RFIDs, and especially the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are leveraging that we all carry devices with us. And so the fact that you have a phone, the fact you have a smartwatch, the fact that you have an iPad or a tablet, those can be detected. And so a lot of times it's counting the number of devices in a space that then can be reflected into the number of people that are in the space. So just continuing on some of these examples of these different technologies. So environmental sensors. This was an example of a matrix of simple sensors that were connected, that were measuring both temperature and humidity. And you can see that it shows you not only in the space, but also at what height you're measuring, because we all have a bubble around us. And so understanding where the heat bubbles are within your space, so that maybe people in a certain area are complaining about high temperatures, you can help narrow it down to where specifically we're talking about. And so this is one that it takes a while to install, but it's cheap hardware, and they could give you some of that feedback more specifically on like how also the temperature and the humidity change throughout the height of your space. this is another type of sensor that is more about a location. So instead of understanding like the height, for example, or being so specific, you understand in the general vicinity of the sensor, what does that look like? And so here they were trying to see the efficiency of a phase transition cooling panel that they're testing. And so wanting to see whether you can see it absorb those high temperatures. And so you can see at the top is the original temperature variation in the space. And then with this phase transitioning cooling panel, how much it dealt with those higher peaks in the temperature. And so another benefit is when you're trying these types of different experimental technologies to get some feedback, see how they work, see whether you want to implement them in other buildings. Floor sensors. Oh, this was a collaboration with UW-Madison where they were developing piezoelectric touch sensitive floor sensors. And so basically they detect weight on them. And so you could put them under the carpet. You can see where people are walking in. Maybe you put them in the entrances of your conference room so that you can understand how often people are having meetings and what are the sizes of those meetings. And so it's an interesting one because you have to put it underneath the carpet. And so it could take a long time to install. It has to be pre-planned. It's hard to do after the fact unless you have some of these carpet tiles that are easy to move, but also could help you understand just the movement of people through your space. Occupant tracking. So we were saying there's different types of video technologies that can help support. And of course, a big question with video is always privacy and how do we make sure that we're not identifying individuals necessarily. And so this is an example where they were using a Microsoft Kinect. And so you can see that it really detects the bodies, but not any personally identifying features. And so this was a test they were doing in a staircase to understand what were the peak times, how many people were moving in between these two floors, to understand how much collaboration there was between the two floors and how much they were connecting. Computer vision is also a big word that we're starting to hear a lot in how do we take advantage of it. And so here we are showing the video, but really what the computer is saving is the number of people and the different resources that it's detecting in the room. And so this is just to show you how it works, that it detects humans, it's detecting the TV monitor, it's detecting the chairs, and so it can help you both track where your people are, but also where your resources are. If your chairs tend to move a lot from one room to the other, we've heard this with several clients, or their tables are moved, this could be an easy way of keeping track of that. Another one that's being used for research now is time lapses, and time lapses are great because you don't need a lot of technology, right? You can do it with your cell phone, you can do it with pretty much any camera. And the benefit here is that the speed provides that anonymity because it goes fast enough that you're not really seeing who the person is, but it helps us understand what is happening in the space. And so here we wanted to understand, how much activation there is in the streets for a street improvement project. And so understanding how many people use the chairs and tables or the benches that we have here, the bicycles, how often are we seeing the bicycles being used? There's a coffee shop here, so how often people are standing in line? And so really trying to understand how the space is being occupied. And so again, the benefit of the time lapse, very easy to set up, and it gives you great insights. We talked a little bit about animation. We talked about like how there's all these opportunities. And let me see, I see there's a new question. It's gonna come up here. Yes, definitely AQ is a big one. Definitely it's really helping, especially carbon monoxide, CO2, both for a lot of these occupancy sensors are leveraging CO2. And so as it goes up, it just assumes that it's more people in the space that are talking and breathing. And so a lot of them leverage that. There's some of the others. I've started to have more of these conversations. I think it stopped a little bit during COVID, just because there wasn't people in the spaces. And so now we're starting to have more of these conversations again. Natural gas and cooking, part more on the smells and the ventilation, and a lot of push into electrification, but not yet. I haven't had the request yet to have the natural gas, but I'm very curious if any of you have, let us know, put it in the chat have you had the request to put some natural gas monitoring into your spaces? That's a really good one. Any other questions of sensors before we keep talking about utilization and animation? Okay, well, think about it. Feel free to keep asking questions. So space utilization, sometimes we don't get that opportunity to measure the people in the space. So we've had also, in some occasions, we've created some space utilization animations in order to help show the data. Sorry, no natural gas monitoring request. Thank you, Mike. Okay, animating the space utilization. So in this case, this was for a healthcare client. This is for their ORs, and there was a discussion about where to put the prep areas for the ORs. And so they had the scheduling of how it works today, but it was very hard for them to visualize how much would it change and how much could it be optimized by putting the spaces next to each other versus if there was a distance and it was separate spaces. And so this was an animation that helped visualize and count how much time it takes to prep, how much time it takes to do the operation, how much time the person has to recover after the OR, and so how often you could do switches. And so some of these animations are really helpful to help people understand it, because sometimes just looking at the schedule, it doesn't really tell you much, versus if you actually see it happen, you see how many people are waiting, how many people are done, how much better that can be. On that same note, we can also look at simulating occupant flow. So we talked a little bit about the badges that a lot of people use in their offices. And so you know when people are coming in, you know when people are going to lunch, when they're coming back. This was an example as we were planning a corporate headquarters that was going to have over 15,000 occupants. They shared their key card data from their original campus so that we can visualize it and do the simulation of when people arrive to work, when they get to their desk, when they go for lunch, what does it look like when they go for lunch, and help them make decisions. So they were discussing whether to have one cafeteria or two cafeterias. And so how would it change the way that people move through the space, the opportunities for serendipitous connections, etc. So I want to jump into some commercial applications. And again, this is not an ad. I have no affiliation with any of them. But as we were talking about what are the different technologies, what are some of the different opportunities of what's out in the market, I thought this was a really great opportunity for us to discuss them and so learn about what there is and how could you use it. So one of them, since we were talking about simulation, I wanted to start with Mass Motion, which was developed by Arab. And so they have crowd and pedestrian simulation software that you can connect to your BIM models. And so you can import your Revit models, your SketchUp models, your AutoCAD models, Nathaniel, all of those you can import into the software. And then you can program the different types of occupants that you're going to have in the space. This was the transit station, and so they're trying to understand when people move, how long it takes after the buses arrive and the train arrives and how much time they have to move through the space. You can have opportunities to explore different scenarios. So what happens if you have two elevators, and so if it's next to each other, if they're separated across the space, how does that impact the time that it'll take people to navigate the space? What happens when one is down? And so maybe you went to one and it's not working, because that never happens in our transit stations, right? Everything always works great. But the day that it's not working, then you have to navigate to the other. And so how much does that impact the way that you move through the space, and especially when you have big crowds? It's also great for evacuation analysis. And so you can also have a whole stadium that you're designing and it's full, and at a moment you have to evacuate it. How are the people going to move through the space? Where are they going to come down? Where are some of those bottlenecks? And so some opportunities for these types of technology. This one is a post-occupancy data device. That was how Element Architects called it in Seattle. This is basically a platform that they've built. And so they are sharing it online so that anyone can recreate it and you can use their technology. And you have different types of sensors. So talking about some of those IAQ sensors, this is a way in which they wanted to start to get easily a lot of feedback. So thinking about the air quality, so CO2 meters, CO meters, air particle meters, combined temperature and humidity. They're also looking at radiant temperature to see how that impacts the perception of the thermal comfort in the spaces, luminance levels, sound levels, and this is all connected as well to an app, and it's a network. So it's a very simple model that they put it in the space, and you can have a series of them throughout the space so that you can understand how things are happening. Air quality and presence of mold. I think it doesn't, Lisa, have the mold yet, but that would be a really great one to include. And again, this is an open technology. They're sharing the programming behind it. And so it's an open source that you can tell them maybe which is a good mold sensor and how do we put it in there. This is a really great question, Teresa, about the light level data. So usually you want where are the occupants going to be? And so there's a lot of on the desks themselves, you can put them so that you can understand how much visibility they have on their area of work. You might want to put some in the areas where people are moving. And so how much light do you have in your corridors and spaces where people are going to focus? If you want to have different levels, you know, you have different purposes. You want areas to feel more comfortable and more cozy for people to socialize. And so it's going to also help you look at some of those contrasts between the light levels. So, but yeah, I would say where people are, usually at their desk height, and usually we do it on their desks when we measure light. This is an example, so talking about CO2, and so here this is an example, and you can see it from their website, by the way. You can see these different readings, and so they have the different light readings and the temperature readings. I, of course, connected to the CO2 readings, since we've been talking about space utilization, and usually this is a great way to see when people are in your space. And so here you can see throughout the day, as people are coming in, the peak of your day and it comes down, maybe there was less people on this day, a lot more people on this day. And so it also gives you an idea of how many people are in your space, in which spaces, and so how your different rooms are being occupied. Comfy, this is an app that is now owned by Siemens, and they have all sorts of things. So now it's a big space utilization. It started with being about thermal comfort, and so that you can say how comfortable you are in your space. And so do you feel like it's too hot? Do you feel like you're good? Do you feel like you're cold? And having the people in their own spaces answer gives you an idea of what the whole space is like. But now they do desk booking and the lighting management. You're able to book some of the rooms. And so it's grown into a whole suite of services in order to understand how your space is working. And so you can see that they have the app. During COVID, of course, a big thing was starting to understand how far were you from hand washing stations and helping you connect to hand washing stations. So I thought it was funny that this is something that they were highlighting in that moment, but it can be more about like, what are your different amenities? Where are they? How do people book them? How do they get there? And so you can also understand what demand there are for your different amenities, how often people are in the space. They can use it to book desks, to book conference rooms. And there's many that are similar like that. So we'll talk about some of the others. Interact, this one is one of the ones who leverages some of the systems that you're already putting into the space. This is based on your lighting. So you put your lights, they have sensors, and it helps you understand as well, the count of people over time. You can see here the different areas, how it creates heat maps for live occupancy, and they use it a lot as well for light management, energy optimization, bioadaptive lighting. Again, I'm very curious if any of you are using any of these. I would love to hear your experiences, but a lot of it is, really connecting your occupants through their phone so that they can book desks, book conference rooms, do some wayfinding, help them locate important points of interest, like that. Disruptive technologies. And so again, I'm only trying to give you a whole awareness of the range of things that are out there. This one is really interesting because they have a lot of different sensors, but they have managed to make them really small so that they're basically disposable. You can stick them anywhere. And so they're like little chip size. You can put it under the desk. You can put it close to a space. They also have CO2 sensors, motion sensors. You can see here, touch, temperature, water, humidity. And so a lot of that environmental monitoring, this is now a really simple, really small way of doing it. Full cam, again, we're seeing a lot of these workspace occupancy management, room desk management, especially as a lot of firms are going to more hoteling type management. And so again, how do you book your rooms? How do you utilize your space? This one, they're also including some of these occupancy count. And so here, this was an interesting snapshot, just like what we saw with the computer vision, right? And so they're counting through a visual of the space, how many people are in the space. Team is one that we're testing in one of our offices as well, where it helps us with navigation and wayfinding. And again, we're moving into the hoteling desks. And so Team is another one of these apps where everyone can access through their phone. They can book a desk, they can come, they can use the space. So Teresa, you're saying hard to mount equipment at desk where people can touch. Usually they put them underneath. And so you would put it on the side underneath where people are not touching. And that's the benefit of some of these that are very small. And so they wouldn't really notice. And so there's some of them that detect heat. There's some of them that detect just the movement of when people are there. But usually you put them underneath the desk on the bottom of the top so that where people can't really touch them. So hopefully there's no coffee that it's spilled on them, etc. Let me update some of these. Okay. We talked about some of these, and Nathan was going to say, you were saying the 2028 Olympic venues in SoCal. If you model for all ticket holders at all venues, well, that would be really interesting. Talk to the mass motion team and see the traffic. The big ones that they also do is like in LA, the traffic to get there, what happens when everybody is arriving to this arena, there's a big event, and then everyone goes at the same time, right? So we finish the event, and suddenly you have thousands of people that are trying to leave the space, that are getting on their cars, that have to navigate. And so some of these are great for that. So 2028 Olympics, yes, it would be very interesting to be able to see how chaotic that's going to be and how do we plan for that. Similar ones, again, density, some of the traffic patterns. You can see here the visualization of some of the heat maps of where people are and how they move through the space. It has a radar basically that helps with counting the people and help you with your 3D space scanning. And then roast is another interesting one because this is similar to, we were talking about being able to, the origins of Comfy, but pushing it a little bit further is this idea of being able to have occupants in your space answer surveys live. And so people as sensors, having them at a glance tell you, where they're feeling comfortable, what the humidity is like, is it breezy or not? And so being able to map that in the space thanks to having their location with their phones. Any questions so far? I know it's a lot. I'm going to give you a minute if there's any other questions that you have, and thank you all for all your questions. And no, you're very welcome. We're almost done. There's just a little bit more, and then we can talk a little bit. But I wanted to talk about this idea of wearables because I think this is where we're pushing it, right? So we're starting to talk about how do you leverage smartphones. And so just like we were talking about with the with what is it called? Roast. There we go. That they're doing using the phones to do some of these surveys. There's now some applications that they're starting to put out for Apple Watch, for Fitbit, where you can do the occupant surveys on your wrist. And so again, helping you understand where the people are and how they're feeling at any moment, and including things not only like the temperature, but also, for example, here, do you feel sleepy or do you feel alert? And so that you can get that that insight, not just of like, I feel cold or I feel hot, but can I focus? Do I feel stuffy? Do I feel fresh? Is it too quiet? Is it comfortable? Is it noisy? Location. And so also leveraging that if you're carrying some of those devices, you're carrying your phone, you're carrying your watch, some of these sensors are starting to leverage that. And so being able to do your occupancy count via Bluetooth and being able to see how many Bluetooth devices there are in a space. And so some of them are room level specific versus area specific. So it depends how accurate you want to be, and going anywhere from 100 users to 10,000 or more. This one I mention really quickly. So this was part of my PhD, where we got to work with understanding the physiology of people and how that connects to the building. And so we're actually tracking heart rate. We're tracking the brain waves. And so we were able to see how you focus or how you relax, your blink strength. So we were talking again about that ability to be alert, right? Or you're getting sleepy. And so if we can see your blink strength, we can actually measure that. And then we can correlate it with the CO2, the temperature, the humidity. And so there's a lot of push to start to understand what is our physiology and how is that impacted by the space where we're at. At Stanford, there's this new group, the Hybrid Physical and Digital Spaces, that is helping push that conversation. And so bringing things like the smartwatch, again, to do some of those heart rates, step tracking, activity sensing, your location. They're trying EDA, so your electrodermal activity. If you're nervous, you might start sweating. And so it detects some of that. And then connecting that to the building data, CO2 levels, air velocity, air temperature, room temperature, all connected to a phone, so that you can also track how are you feeling, how is it going, how's the building impacting you. The Harvard University THM School of Public Health similarly developed their 4Health app that they've been using for some of these cog effects studies around the world. And so connecting now wearable monitors to the app. Now, by the way, they've released the app. So if you're doing research and you want to use it to track material and do some testing with your occupants, you can actually get access to their app so that you can do different types of activities and tasks, and connect that to the space where your occupants are in. Big picture, a lot of it, people are starting to talk about this because we're trying to get our brains around this new world where you have people that are in person, virtual, hybrid. How do we collaborate? How do we begin? How do we connect with each other? And how do we begin to understand how people are using the spaces and why, and what is going to bring them back? And so again, it goes back to what are your goals, and are you focused on the building operations? Are you focused on your environmental impact? Are you focused on the user experience or the way that you manage the spaces? And having some of these tools can help you have better insights that can help support your decision making, the way that you redesign your spaces, how you understand how your people work and what they're trying to do and what they're trying to achieve in the space. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and I want to open it up for questions. And I see a couple in the chat. Let me hear. Yeah, it is like drinking from a fire hose. Even putting this together, I was like, I'm glad that we have 90 minutes because it's a lot. And so it's good to be able to talk through it and like, when do you use some of these? The recipe will be willing to track or give up their data. That is a big question, Jackie, and a lot of it is, that's why most of this information is anonymous. So usually it's not about an individual, but it's more about there's a person in the space and how do they feel and how are they using the space. And so anonymity is a big, big, big thing in this world of understanding how do we respect your privacy. Some of the research experiments when it's with universities, you have to give your willing consent, you have to sign a lot of paperwork, and only the research teams have access to your information. No one else can ever know. And so usually what is being shared is the aggregated information for all of the occupants. And again, that's the benefit of having some of the demographic information just to help you understand, what are some of the things that might be impacting some of these results. But most importantly, there is definitely that conversation to be had about people's ownership of their own data. You always own your own data. You can always ask for your own data so that you have control over it. Let's see, have you seen how much has been attributed to individual differences? And can I share that roast slide again? Yes, and I can share the link. So yes, individual differences is really interesting. I think for my own research, when we're really connecting in deeply and looking at the physiological data, there's two things that we found. One is definitely each individual has a different experience. And so it's important to understand the individual differences, but also it's not consistent for just the one individual, but it depends on what you're doing. And so what activity are you trying to do? So if you're trying to focus, there's going to be one type of environment that is going to be most conducive to you being able to focus better versus if you're socializing, if you're brainstorming, if you're trying to be creative, that's going to be different. And so definitely the nuances are super interesting. And it goes back to understanding your population and understanding what they're trying to do, what are the activities that are happening in the space. Yeah, so Lisa, hi, thank you for sharing. She was saying that in her research from Harvard THN, it is estimated that 1 out of 2 buildings are water damaged, which is a very troubling statistic. Once a building is water damaged, in 48 hours, it grows mold. I am surprised there is not a widespread concern in the aftermath of COVID to track air quality and mold counts for the health of the occupants. That is such a great point. The one time that I've had this conversation, Lisa, is with Puerto Ricans who've had a lot of mold issues, especially after some of the hurricanes that have passed through the island. And a lot of these issues of how their spaces immediately were covered in mold, and so how to manage that. And so I think that's the only place where I've had more in-depth conversations about the potential for tracking mold. But other than that, it's really good to know. 1 out of 2 buildings, that is really scary. Hey, Nathaniel, my PhD is in civil and environmental engineering from Stanford. And so working with the Sustainable Design and Construction group and really we were in a collaboration with several universities around the world. And so we had students that were working in distributed teams. So we were literally doing this, many years ago. My PhD was between 2015 and 2019. And we were doing different people in virtual meetings that were designers. We had architects, engineers, construction managers, life cycle financial managers, and MEP engineers working together and collaborating, designing teams. And so really understanding some of their physiological sensors in this distributed remote world. What did it look like? And how did the building impact your ability to focus, your ability to connect, and the different activities that you were doing? Let's see, have you ever tried to use the data for accessibility needs? Accessibility is a really interesting one. I've seen it more for some of those simulations. So you're able to put in people in wheelchairs, you're able to put people with different different types of mobility so that they can navigate the space and so that you can understand where they're having issues. You can also, in some of these different types of softwares, for example, you can change some of the visibility of the different the signage that is in the building so that you can understand how much that impacts people's ability to navigate the space. And one more interesting one, we've had a conversation once, and that was using VR, and how do you create the visibility and how do you showcase different levels of visual issues that people might have. I don't remember what the right terminology is, but in order to understand how different people might observe the space and how much that impacts their visibility. Okay, this is a great one. How do you gain client support on providing this pre and post occupancy data or sensor implementation into their spaces? And what are some examples of how this information has informed projects at CGF? So a big one is starting with these types of conversations. And I think the more that we talk about it and the more awareness that we create about the benefits that it has, that helps a lot. It's all about what they're getting back, right? And how this is going to help inform. Change management is a big issue that people struggle with. And so helping them understand how this data is going to help them have some of those conversations, how some of these perspectives that we can get is going to get a diversity of opinions that are going to come and help provide better solutions into the spaces. I think emphasizing the positive that we're gaining and how we can leverage that information is a big part of having these conversations with the clients. And I think there's some industries that are big on continuous improvement, and that helps a lot. So especially, for example, our healthcare clients, they get it. They monitor their operations. They're continuously improving. They live on feedbacks. They understand the numbers. And so they, it's an easy sell. They request it a lot. They expect it from us. It's something that we have to do in our buildings. Versus with clients that maybe not so familiar, helping them understand and shift into this idea from evaluation and the fear of negative feedback to the idea of all of these positive gains that you can get. I saw a quote the other day that was saying that, the negative feedback, you're going to get it. People are going to complain. And so you usually get the negative feedback in other rooms, but you never get the positive feedback. Nobody, gets on their phone to tell you how good the temperature, how good the space is in this area. And so this is a great opportunity to get as well some of that balance of what are the things that are working well. Also, when you have innovations that are going into the space, I think that is a big one as well. When you're trying something out or you're changing the way that you work. And so things like going from private offices into open collaborative space and more task focused spaces. That is really important to understand what are people's fears and what are the things that they're so passionate about their private office. And so is it about the closed door, or is it about the visual privacy and the sound privacy? Is it about being able to have some of their personal items and make it feel more like it's my space versus if I shared something? Like, how do we bring that feeling into a shared collaboration space? And so really being able to have those deep conversations and being able to highlight some of those perspectives of different people that the decision makers might not always have access to. I think that also becomes a really important aha moment. And so it's all about understanding the value and making it actionable. I think there's a little bit of fear when it has to do with numbers and when we're talking about statistics and is it, statistically significant and what is the ROI, that it becomes too technical. I think a big part of my role and something that I'm very passionate about is in the translation of what we're measuring and what we're seeing and what does that mean for the design decisions. And so the so what, I think it's what's most important. Let's see, I think there's some others. I'm trying something. If there's a central database where building sensors data is shared, and do you think it would be useful to have one for building design improvements? Oh my God, it would be so useful. It would be great. And I think research, this is not where our competitive advantage is as individual firms. Our individual advantages is in the way that we think and the way that we design the spaces and, you know, our different styles. And so it would be great to be able to share some more of these information, of get some more of these insights of how people use spaces and what are the things that are beneficial. We're all working towards a better world and great buildings where people are going to thrive and they're going to have the best day and they're going to be able to focus and have their aha moments and they're going to be able to collaborate and come up with great ideas, you know. And so that's where we should be working towards. And I think this type of information can just help all of us. And we should all be able to do better as an industry by understanding these things. And so I am not aware of a central database, but if there's one, let me know. Please reach out. I would love to know, and I would love to be able to have more of these conversations. So Lisa was saying that in terms of climate change, Harvard Joint Center of Housing Studies suggests that current building codes and construction practices are based on overly narrow projected climate conditions that may be ill-suited for future climate conditions. Yes, as the climate changes, the incidence of mold in buildings also increases. That's why we need air quality monitoring. You're so right. And I think a big part of this is also understanding, you know, we do it a lot for like our sustainability of the buildings, for resiliency conversations, you know, starting to do some of these simulations and understanding of not only how is the building performing today, but what is going to happen in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. And so definitely starting to understand what the climate is going to be, what are the risks that are happening. And so I'm starting to see that a little bit more, I think, as resilience is becoming a higher topic of conversation. This is definitely a good one. And then I saw something else. Here we go. Is ethnic background considered on the evaluation process? Hey, Carlos. Yes. In some cases, we do ask for in part of the demographic information, we've asked for the ethnic background, and so race and ethnicity. It becomes really interesting. And so, you know, we just did, and we did a public presentation on a Washington State University Tri-Cities Collaboration Hall. And part of WSU is really critical to understand that they have a lot of first generation students. More than 50% of their students are first generation, and more than 50% of students are Black or Hispanic. And so it was really important to understand their perspective. And a big emphasis for this building was thinking about the sense of belonging and welcoming, and especially it's an engineering building, but they wanted to make it sure that it was somewhere where everyone felt welcome and that all students knew that this was a space for them where they can come. The space is mostly collaboration spaces. You know, it's really designed, there's no faculty offices. And so I just saw the example of, you know, how this information informs projects at CTF. That's, you know, this one is a really great one of like really understanding what were the things that the students connected with feeling that sense of belonging in a space. And so they talked a lot about visibility, they talked a lot about daylight, they talked a lot about open spaces, the ability of having furniture that they can move and they can adapt to their needs, of having different types of furniture so that different types of bodies can feel comfortable in them, that you can adapt them to what you're trying to do. And so understanding their backgrounds, having conversations with them. You know, in this case, there was a whole engagement process with students in order to hear their voices and hear what was most valuable to them. And then we did a post-occupancy evaluation survey for the students where we asked them about what are some of these areas of the building that contribute to that sense of belonging in the building. And so ethnic background, I think, especially for some critical projects, is really important to understand. You know, we're talking about individual differences. That also becomes your background could really affect the way that you perceive thermal comfort, for example. And so, what are you wearing? And it's traditional. And where are you from? Did you sleep yesterday? A lot of these things can also impact that. There's been a question a couple of times, and I say this is for Lisa that you can answer. Does Wi-Fi increase mold growth? I have no idea. I've never heard this, but Lisa, if you know, let us know. Let's see. There's another one about the concern for Wi-Fi to be an environmental toxin, and to remove any studies on life forms exposed to 5G. I don't, Robert, but I'm sure there should be. We can figure it out. We imagine with like a school of public health or more on the medical side that might know, but yeah, I haven't heard about this.
Okay,
Cool.
Flavia, let me jump in a little bit because I know we're
Yes.
getting down to the end. So I'll give you the last question, so to speak. One of the things that I've run into a lot is EMF and measurements of EMF, because there's a lot of transmission lines in the urban environment. A lot of schools are located next to the easements. I know that in the Inland Empire in Southern California, a lot of real estate purchases, you have to sign paperwork that acknowledges that you're within 1,000 feet of power transmission lines. The intonation is that there's a problem there. The School of Biology in Germany, as far back as the late 70s, as I recall, was advocating that no power be on in the house at night during sleeping, especially wherever the headboard was against the wall, because they didn't want to have interference between the EMF and sleeping, because it affects sleep. So it's a highly controversial topic with the utility companies, but it is a significant problem in the sense that when you look at the number of land uses in and around and under these fields, and if they're asking you to sign paperwork, there must be something to it. So when I see all these questions about Wi-Fi, it is kind of interesting that in this digital world, we're walking around in a cloud of EMF all day long. And at some point, you would have to suspect that there are physiological effects that would affect performance. So your thoughts, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting one. I would say, like, I haven't run into this yet in my working life. I'm sure there's a lot of research around it, and I think it will definitely be an important thing to consider. You know, there's a lot of like site analysis that is discussed, and so that's an interesting one. I'm imagining for urban design, this might be a big area to think about, because I think our urban designers, and now that you've asked it, I'm gonna go talk to my urban designers right now, because I'm thinking it's super. I'm not sure how they think about it. I'm sure it's part of, you know, when they're thinking about where housing is going to be and different types of spaces. I'm wondering how they include that, because yeah, I haven't heard of it being within like a building that we've measured that. You know, when we talk about, for example, impacts to sleep, that one, yes, definitely. And so there's a lot of talk about circadian lighting and how helpful that is, and how does that impact, and especially in healthcare environments, how does that help recovery? We're doing some really great research on circadian lighting in babies as well. And so what do NICUs, how can they leverage circadian lighting in order to help the development of babies? And so definitely sleep, light, but not yet with the electrical signals. And, you know, it's interesting with this, thinking about the Wi-Fi and thinking about some of these electrification impacts. I haven't heard that before, but I'm now very curious about it. So I'll follow up, Frank, and I'm going to let you know.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Well, I was on a noise abatement committee that was challenging the local power plant, and we brought it up.
Yeah.
And they brought the big guns out. I mean, they immediately brought the people out in denial, you know, and the more we dug into it, it was like, there's more here than meets the eye. This was in the 80s. So,
well, I see that Nicole in the chat has shared some EPA references about electric and magnetic fields and power lines. Thank you, Nicole, for finding that.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, so I saw another question right there about quantum computing or AI. I love that question. So quantum computer, not yet, but AI, definitely. There's a lot of understanding how AI can help us. For example, when you do surveys and you have open-ended questions, and then you have to go through them and summarize them and find trends, like how can we leverage AI to help automate some of those processes? There's a lot in how you help it do some of, as you're starting to aggregate all of the information from different projects, AI can help you find some trends, so that you can understand some of what's going to be happening and some modeling for the future, and starting to make some of those connections between different criteria and how that's impacted. I think AI is something that I'm super interested in. We have a team at CGF that is looking into AI and other future technologies. And so I think it's something that we're definitely thinking of, how much can we leverage that? And especially as you start to get sensor data, I think that will be a really great one as well that you can explore. How do you get better insights from it? And so neural networks could be a great one of connecting lots of different sources of data and providing insights. And so definitely something that we're thinking about. And then let's see. Yeah, I think that was the last question. Frank, did you have anything else, Rebecca?
No, I think that's good. I mean, it's phenomenal. I mean, you gave us a 15-minute, 20-minute overview at the Continuing Education Committee meeting, and it went to this. I'm really blown away. This is wow, fantastic job. Appreciate it so much. Great job. I mean, I see people want you to come back, so we'll have to figure out how that works, but definitely.
Very happy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Gray, for this extremely informative presentation. Wonderful data. It was so interesting. I appreciated every second of it, and I think everyone in the chat and the Q&A definitely did as well.